You know, when we think of history's deadliest conflicts, a few names always come up. And right near the top of that list is the Battle of the Somme. This wasn't just a battle, it was a 4-month-long meat grinder that left a scar on the 20th century.
So let's just start with a number that tells the whole story, really. Over 1 million. 1 million men, killed or wounded. Try to wrap your head around that for a second. It's a staggering figure, a level of human loss that's just hard to even imagine. And this all happened in just over 4 months, in one tiny part of France.
Take a look at the faces of these soldiers. These are the Royal Irish Rifles, right at the beginning of the battle. They're part of this huge force, over 3 million men in total, all about to be thrown into the fight. You have to wonder what's going through their minds. For so many of them, this was it. The last quiet moment before they walked into an absolute storm of machine guns and artillery.
Which brings us to the big question, right? How? How does a single battle get this deadly? It wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of bad planning, shifting goals, and brutal new technology. So let's dig in and figure out exactly why the Somme turned into such a tragedy.
All right, Section 1, a plan derailed. The key to understanding the Somme is knowing this. It was never supposed to happen the way it did. The original idea was something completely different, but a crisis somewhere else completely derailed the whole thing.
So, let's rewind a bit. The original goal? It was all about a big, decisive victory. Back in late 1915, the Allies got together and cooked up this grand plan for a huge joint offensive. The idea was that the British and the French would hit the Germans hard, right here on the Somme, and just break the Western Front wide open, end the stalemate for good.
But then, everything changed. And this timeline shows you exactly how. See, in February of 1916, the Germans launched their own massive attack on the French at Verdun. And Verdun became this vortex of death that just sucked the French army dry. All of a sudden, the Somme wasn't about winning the war anymore. It became a desperate emergency measure to save the French by pulling German soldiers away from Verdun.
And this right here is a critical switch. The whole plan got turned on its head. Originally, it was a French-led attack, with the British playing a supporting role. The goal was a decisive victory. But the new reality? Now the British had to take the lead, with what was left of the French supporting them. And the goal wasn't victory anymore. It was just to relieve the pressure on Verdun. And they had to do it with an army full of brand new, volunteer soldiers who'd never seen combat. A huge, huge change.
Okay, so that sets the stage for what would become the bloodiest single day in the history of the British Army, July 1st, 1916, a day of absolute catastrophe. But what's fascinating is that it wasn't a disaster for everyone. And just look at what they were facing. This wasn't some hastily dug ditch. The Germans had 2 years to turn this place into a fortress. We're talking about layers and layers of trenches, massive fields of barbed wire, and deep concrete bunkers that were basically bomb-proof. It was an absolute death trap.
And this was the plan. You see these lines on the map? Those are the objectives. They were incredibly ambitious. The British generals basically expected their men to just get up, walk across no man's land, and punch right through that fortress we just saw. It was a plan that relied on everything going perfectly. A massive gamble.
The result? It was like 2 completely different battles fought on the same day. Down in the French sector, it was a stunning success. Their attack worked, the German lines broke, and they took their objectives with pretty light casualties. But for the British, it was an unmitigated disaster. Why? Because they'd been given the toughest nut to crack, the strongest part of the German defenses. And the price was 57,470 casualties in 1 day.
I mean, that quote says it all, doesn't it? The worst in the history of the British Army. And to be clear, of those nearly 58,000 casualties, over 19,000 men were killed. 19,000 dead before the sun went down. It's a number that just defies belief. And it's a record that still stands.
So, after that catastrophic first day, any fantasy of a quick breakthrough was just gone. The battle changed. It wasn't about speed or maneuver anymore. It turned into a slow, brutal, ugly grind. It became a war of attrition.
And what is attrition warfare? Well, it's pretty grim. It's when you basically give up on outsmarting the enemy and just decide to outbleed them. The new goal isn't to take a hill or a town. The goal is to inflict so many casualties, to kill and wound so many of their guys
that the other side just physically can't fight anymore. It's war as a horrible, bloody math problem.
If you want to know what attrition looks like, this is it. This was Delville Wood. It's been so shelled that it looks like the surface of the moon. The battle became these insane, vicious fights for tiny little patches of ground like this. A great example is the South African brigade that fought here. In 6 days, they suffered over 2,500 casualties. That's a staggering loss for such a small area.
But right in the middle of all this mud and blood, something completely new appeared on the battlefield. In September, the world saw the combat debut of a secret weapon, the tank. Now, it sounds like a game changer, but these first tanks were, well, they were pretty terrible. They were slow, they broke down constantly, and they really didn't have the impact everyone was hoping for. Not yet, anyway. And the whole time, the battle just kept getting bigger and bigger. Both sides just funneled more and more men into the fight. Just look at these numbers. On day one, you had a total of about 35 divisions. By November, that number had exploded to almost 150. The Somme literally became a vortex that was just sucking in the armies of Britain, France, and Germany.
So after 141 days, the fighting finally just fizzled out in the winter mud. Which leads to the final haunting question. Was any of it worth it? Was it a victory or just sheer futility? That's a debate that is still raging a century later.
And this map just says it all. After all that, after 4.5 months of relentless fighting, after over 1 million casualties, the front line had moved a grand total of 6 miles. 6. They didn't even capture the main towns they set out to take on day one.
So let's come back to the human cost. The numbers are just mind-boggling. About 420,000 casualties for the British Commonwealth, 200,000 for the French, and for the Germans, somewhere between 440 and 600,000. All for those 6 miles of mud. An entire generation was just shattered.
So what was the final verdict? Well, officially it was inconclusive. A draw. There was no knockout punch. The Allies didn't get their breakthrough, but they absolutely hammered the German army, leaving it badly weakened, even if it wasn't totally broken.
But the impact of the battle is much more complicated than just a win or a loss. On one hand, yes, it did weaken the German army and probably saved the French it for done. It was also where armies learned hard lessons about modern warfare. But on the other hand, for generations of people, the Somme became the ultimate symbol of meaningless sacrifice and the horrific slaughter of World War I.
And that's really where we're left. It's the question historians are still grappling with. Was the Somme a necessary evil, a horrifying but essential step on the road to victory? Or was it just a monumental, tragic waste of life, a disaster born from a terrible plan? There's no easy answer, and maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's something to think about.